How difficult was it to keep the game of cricket alive in South Africa during that period of isolation?
I think very difficult. We were isolated, but you know, when you're in the corner and you got to keep a sport, a code alive, vibrant, you probably become more innovative, more marketing orientated, you become more creative. And I think we came up with a lot of few firsts, which helped us to a certain extent to sustain the interest for cricket over a very difficult period. I think particularly of Benson Hedges day-night cricket, we introduced in the 80s at provincial level. It caught the imagination of the South African public, and it helped us in a certain way to keep the game alive in South Africa.
Do you feel that some of those rebel tours were also a hindrance to cricket in South Africa?
Certainly amongst the white cricketers, it did have a beneficial effect. There can be no question about it. But I think back to the late 70s, and I'm trying to always rationalize in my own mind why we went forward with those tours. I think there were three fundamental reasons. The first one is that the game was stagnating. Secondly, every year in the 70s, in June, July, there would be a delegation going to the United Kingdom. We were still hopeful the door would be open, we'd be readmitted back into world cricket. And there was a very crucial meeting, the late 70s, with the England Cricket Board, and Doug Insall, to his credit, was straight and honest to us. He said, "Ollie and chaps, if we play with you, we will be isolating world cricket. You cannot play against an England cricket team until apartheid is scrapped." Simple, clear, that was it. And I think thirdly, and I was so totally wrong here, I had a viewpoint that apartheid would be here for the rest of my life, and therefore we would be isolated for the rest of my life. I was so wrong. And when we had the great political changes in the early 90s, and I met quite a few of the senior ANC leaders who were in exile, who were in Robben Island, like the late Steve Schwete, they all said to me they knew that one day apartheid would be abolished.
What were the practical issues you had to deal with during the apartheid era?
It was keeping the game alive. After the Australian tour in 1970, we had 20 years of isolation. We did have the influx of a few of these rebel tours, which to a certain extent amongst white cricketers, it did keep interest going. But it was a difficult period. We had some wonderfully talented cricketers, white cricketers, during the 70s and 80s, who were never given the opportunity of playing international cricket. People like Clive Rice never played test cricket, Vince van der Bijl, Alan Lamb. I mean, he was South African, although he played for England, he should have played test cricket for South Africa. Kenny McKeown, wonderful cricketer. So there were many in the 70s and 80s who were never given that opportunity. And I must say too, amongst the black community, in the 70s and 80s, I have no doubt there were many fine, aspiring young cricketers given the same opportunities, encouragement, facilities, coaching that our white cricketers experienced, they would have come through too and reached international stardom.
How big a moment was it for South Africa when they were reinstated back into international cricket?
Certainly from my personal point of view as a player and administrator, the highlight of my career would have been the unification of South African cricket in the early 90s. And you must try to comprehend, for decades and decades in South Africa, cricket was segregated. White cricketers never played against black cricketers or with them. Umpires, scorers, administrators, they were segregated, they were separated. And here for the first time ever, crazily, we were united. So that for me was a wonderful occasion. The readmission of South African cricket in 1991 would never have come about without the support of the African National Congress. In 1991, there was no guarantee, no certainty that there would be democracy in our country. The political prisoners were released from Robben Island, but there was still turmoil in South Africa, and nobody knew in which direction the country would move. And yet the ANC, to their absolute credit, and Thabo Mbeki was at the forefront of this, he encouraged the late Steve Schwete to come with me to London in 1991 and to go to the black cricketing countries, the the West Indies, India and Pakistan, and indicate to them that for the first time in South Africa there was a united, non-racial, non-sexist cricketing body who had wonderful hopes and vision of creating for the very first time equal opportunities for all cricketers, irrespective of whether they're white and black, and that they should be encouraged. And that visit turned the table, and for the first time we got at the ICC conference in London, and remarkably for the first time ever in the history of South African cricket, India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka supported our readmission to world cricket. Not only supported it, but we were proposed by India, of all countries. And I think that initiated a very close cricketing relationship which has always existed since 1991 between South Africa and India.
How big an influence was Nelson Mandela on you personally?
For me personally, the most remarkable man I've ever met. I mean, his capacity to forgive his oppressors. I mean, he was 27 in jail. Not forget, to forgive them is genuine and honest. The most remarkable man. And the early 90s, out of nowhere, with all the turmoil in South Africa, not sure where political direction the country moved, the cricketing administrators came to mix with people like Nelson Mandela. And he is an icon in this country. He is South Africa's greatest ever son. He's revered by all South Africans.
What role did you play in bringing integration into South Africa cricket?
I always felt, even during my playing career, that there was something wrong in our country, that all the advantages, privileges with white cricketers, not with black cricketers. And certainly in 1986, I had this feel, this passion, this commitment with other South Africans for the first time on a meaningful basis to take cricket to the disadvantaged areas of South Africa and mainly to the black townships. And it was a wonderful time as we went around the country and we got more and more white South Africans, black South Africans involved in this. It was a crusade, there can be no question about it. And it wasn't only about taking cricket per se to the black community, but it was also about mixing for the very first time on a meaningful basis white and black, children, teachers, coaches, and probably more importantly, creating hope for young black cricketers that there was a path down the road, that if they showed potential and talent and commitment and desire, they could ultimately one day for the very first time rise and become international cricketing stars like Mackay and Tini showed that it could be done.